Welcome to the Build Your Coaching Business Around the 9 to 5 podcast. I'm your coach, Pamella Pritchard, and I help you go from employee to business owner. Whether you're creating your first client or learning how to create clients on repeat whilst holding down your day job, I'll help you make your business dreams a reality. Let's begin. Hello, welcome back to the podcast. Today, I'm bringing you something a little bit different to my usual format because I have been inspired this weekend from my trip away, where I was really enjoying reading some fiction, which I've really got into recently as my way of relaxing, unwinding, just enjoying some creative pursuits. And the wisdom that came through was just so magical. I have been reading, or I've just started reading, Lord of the Rings by J.R.R Tolkien. And I finished reading The Notebook by Nicholas Sparks. And I couldn't believe it when I finished The Notebook, and at the end of it, there was a Q&A with Nicholas Sparks. And at the beginning of this copy of Lord of the Rings, there is a foreword where J.R.R Tolkien speaks about his experience publishing this book and the exposure and the feedback that he's received, the criticism that he's received. Same with Nicholas Sparks, as he speaks about publishing and gives some advice for aspiring writers. And as I was reading this, I couldn't help but think, oh my gosh, this is so relevant to aspiring coaches, to coaches who are wanting to grow their business, sign 3 to 5, if not 10 clients per month. But I think you'll find if you were doing that every single month, you would run out of capacity quite quickly. Most coaches I work with are aiming for anything between 3 and 6 clients per month, and to be able to replace their corporate salary and make coaching their primary form of income. And I absolutely love when you can hear from people who have created success in other creative pursuits, like authors, singers, songwriters, actors. I find anybody in the creative space who has created some level of success. And when you think about it from a context perspective, like there's us and our little business, most of my listeners. So if you're listening to this, you're probably less than 6 figures. You're probably still trying to figure out how to sign clients, how to make that more consistent, how to consistently sell and get your message out there and be seen as an authority and as a leader in your space. And even me, who is, a few steps ahead, I absolutely love connecting to creatives and listening to creatives on their creative pursuit, because contextually, if they have had any kind of success, they have had, therefore, greater success, greater failure, greater exposure, greater visibility. And what they have to say on the matter is always full of wisdom and always something that I take to heart. So I'm always a fan of reading Q&As from artists, reading four words in a book, if that's available, especially if it's a new edition and there's been an update since the progress of the initial publication of the book. I absolutely love watching documentaries on Netflix with artists and famous people, because I just always think, if I have visibility fears, if I have fears of exposure, if my clients have fears about success, if my clients have fears about failure, that isn't a patch on the level of failure, success, exposure, visibility that these guys have probably faced, because the scale of it is just so much bigger. And I don't say that to mitigate what we go through and what you go through in your context, but I always just think to myself, my God, at least I'm not a superstar. At least I'm not at the $1 billion level. At least I'm not a best-selling author, because for every success that you see, take a minute to just imagine the amount of criticism that they also receive, the amount of feedback they receive, the amount of opinions that people think that they have a right to share and tell them about. And so I always think that's really humbling, and it always just reminds me of actually my context is smaller, and I get to be really grateful for that. I get to be really grateful that my exposure isn't as big as someone ultra famous, as somebody ultra successful. And I like to think that if I were to get there and have, so I don't know, something blow up, something just go absolutely phenomenally crazy, ahead of my time, faster than what I have necessarily built up to, then would I have the foundation of a really strong nervous system and really strong capacity within myself to be able to hold it all? And I do believe that we are never given the level of success that we can't handle. But as we know, when we look to those who have had extreme fame, extreme exposure, extreme success, they have also had to face extreme challenges, extreme criticism, extreme judgment, many opinions, and it hasn't always ended well at all. So I don't take that lightly. And I encourage you to watch those things and notice things like this as well alongside me and reflect on what it can mean for you and your growth. And then the ripple effect of that on the people you serve and how that is relevant to the people you serve. So when I was reading, I'm going to start off with The Wisdom from Middle Earth, since that's inspired the name of the podcast today. So this is what J.R.R. Tolkien wrote in, I hope I feel like I'm not saying his name right, by the way. I feel like there's probably a better way to say his name. So if I've not said it, if I've not said it correctly, please don't be offended. I'll say it to the best of my ability just now. But this is what he said. So this passage is a little bit long. It's a paragraph, but soak in the words, and the way he speaks is older English. So I will translate it for us in a second, but listen to this. So, The Lord of the Rings has been read by many people since it finally appeared in print, and I should like to say something here with reference to the many opinions or guesses that I have received or have read. Some who have read the book, or at any rate have reviewed it, which I also think is a really important distinction. There's reading it and reviewing a book, but those who have read the book or at any rate have reviewed it have found it boring, absurd, or contemptible. And I have no cause to complain, since I have similar opinions of their works or of the kinds of writing that they evidently prefer. But even from the points of view of many who have enjoyed my story, there is much that fails to please. It is perhaps not possible in a long tale to please everybody at all points, nor to displease everybody at the same points. For I find from the letters that I have received that the passages or chapters that are to some a blemish are all by others specially approved. The most critical reader of all, myself, now finds many defects, minor and major, but being fortunately under no obligation either to review the book or to write it again, he, as in he will pass over these in silence, except one that has been noted by others. The book is too short. Oh, when I read that, it literally brought tears to my eyes, and it kind of does right now. It is exactly it. Every time you put anything out there, anytime you create, whether it's a post, whether it's an email, whether it's a pin, whether it's a podcast episode, any time that you are putting even your offer, because your offer is a creation, right? Anytime you put yourself out there, somebody is going to find it, what were his words? Boring, absurd, or contemptible. How brilliant is that? I've never thought that about my own work, but I thought, God, that's just fucking genius. Like, somebody somewhere has no freaking interest in what we do. And yet, what is a blemish to some are all by others specially approved. For some, your work is especially approved. And I love the fact that he also comments about how he himself is the most critical reader of all, and how he finds his own defects, minor and major, that I couldn't even say earlier. But he's also, fortunately, under no obligation to review it or write it again. And I think that's something that's a little bit different when it comes to like writing a book versus being a coach. Obviously, there's lots of parallels that we can bring here, but I love that that's one of the differences. Like when you write a book, it is so final, right? Like you can do additions, you can update it, I suppose. But when you take a book to publish, that is it. It is done. Like, by and large, it is done. I often think this about songwriting too. Like, imagine some of the greatest hits, like the greatest music, the greatest songs that you absolutely love. And then that poor artist is stuck with that bloody song every single time they ever play live. If they stay singing for the rest of their days, for the next 20, 30, 40 decades, that as and no matter how much their music has evolved, how much they have evolved, how much they have grown since the song. And every great song is often rooted in some great love or great pain. So no matter how much they have evolved since that period in their life, they are forevermore plagued with having to sing that song again. And look, I think there is magic in that, because at some point it stops becoming about their connection to the song and about their connection to the fans who love the music. And I see that with this book writing, and I think we're really blessed as coaches, because anything that we do, we're not stuck with. The nature of our work and our creation is a little bit different compared to authors, artists, actors. I mean, we're artists, so let's say authors, musicians, and actors. Compared to them, our artistry, the nature of our artistry is that it evolves, that it gets to grow, that it's meant to grow, and that the things that we did that were great once upon a time, we can move on from. But in saying that, I can honestly say that I have found from experience that there are some trainings that I created 2-3 years ago that are still inside my Thrive portal, that I dare touch them and I dare upgrade them, because I am told time and time again how timeless they are and how brilliant they are. Because this is the thing. When I created it from the version of who I was back then, the transmission as it came through as that version of me is exactly the transmission that it needed to be. The today version of me wouldn't have been capable of creating it in that way, because I'm not the version who was meant to create that. It was the 3-year-old, 3 years ago version of me that was meant to create that training. So some trainings I've updated and upgraded and evolved, and other trainings I've kept the same, and you're going to find the same as well. And so this wisdom from Middle Earth, I've highlighted it here, as you can see if you're watching it on video. I I'm so in love with it. And the fact that he said at the end, the book is too short, it's just the way he wrote that, as if to be like, if anything, of all the things that it could be. And I remember when I first read it, right? I remember thinking how long Lord of the Rings is. And yet, how funny is it when you watch the movies now? Like, anybody who's anybody's will hands down, myself included, say the extended edition is the edition to watch. In fact, if you're not watching the extended edition, then what are you doing? So I just, I love that. I love that wisdom so, so much. So the wisdom I want you to take from it is there will be criticism. Ironically, you will be your own worst critic. And yet, that is not the point. The point is that you create. The point is that you let it come through. You let it be what it is. And then, as an artist, for some artistry, it's complete as it is, as it was for him. Like that, I think he went on to write some things, but none of it compared to Lord of the Rings. And that's okay. But in our world as coaches, our life is our art. Our life's work is the coaching, which is always evolving, always expanding. We're always in the doing of coaching. So that, I think, you can take away from it. Like, you are going to get to a stage where you may well receive feedback. And it might be interesting that some of the fears that you currently hold and some of the things that currently hold you back in your business, such as visibility, exposure, failure, success, that comes from this like concern about how others may judge you or perceive you. And as Tolkien said, like, he's not exempt. Our greatest judge is often ourselves, because before you actually receive that judgment from other people, in order to fear it, you've created that judgment of yourself, and then you've put yourself in a cage. You've put yourself in a space of not being in full expression. And even the great writer of Lord of the Rings has experienced this phenomenon. And there he is, sharing his 2 cents on it. I love it. I love it so much. Okay, so let's move on to Nicholas Sparks, The Notebook, which, by the way, I thought was excellent. I also have to say, if you're interested, I actually think in some ways the film was better, but in many ways, as a true reader and lover of books, the book in its own way was absolutely sensational. Very quick read as well. Comparatively to Lord of the Rings, it literally took me a couple of days, couple of hours a day. So it was a Q&A, lots of beautiful questions about the story itself, but then the last question, and in my opinion, as a business coach, the most important one was, what advice do you have for aspiring writers? And he gives 4 tips, but 2 of them stood out to me. So this is what he said: learn as much as you can about publishing. Learn how it works, how to get published, how to market your book, and what editors look for, etc. Publishing is, after all, a business. And I thought that was just exactly the point. I say this a lot in my content because I hear it a lot from my new clients when they first work with me. People start working with me as their business coach because they say to me, I just want to coach, but I can't coach as much as I want to because the business isn't working. It isn't up and running. It isn't doing what it's meant to do in creating clients. So therefore I have no one to coach. And this is what I say to them. Learn as much as you can about business. Learn how it works. I would swap. So I'm swapping publishing for coaching relevant things. Learn how it works, how to get visible, how to market your coaching, what your clients are looking for. Publishing is, after all, a business. Coaching is, after all, a business. This man knows. There is wisdom from Nicholas Sparks here, the infamous writer. And then his final one, and finally, write. You can't be a writer without writing. Now, those of you inside my Thrive program will know that one of my core foundations is always be coaching. And just as Nicholas Sparks says, and I'll rephrase it for us, and finally, coach. You can't be a coach without coaching. So good. So let's break down these 2 pieces here. And this is why I do what I do. I freaking adore coaching. Everybody needs a coach, in my opinion. Everybody would at least benefit from a coach. Not everybody wants a coach, which is a different story for another day, in terms of who you're marketing to and who you're thinking about. But when it comes to being able to coach, do what you love, and unlike writing, because you could write for yourself, you could write books and not have anybody see them, and there's no problem with that. Just as how you could write music and have nobody hear it, just as you could create art and have nobody see it. But coaching inherently requires another. You can self-coach, which I also encourage, but to be a coach, it inherently requires another. And in order to attract another into your coaching, you need to learn the business side of things. In order to be able to coach more, it goes hand in hand with business. And this is where it's a little bit different to writing, because you can be a writer and not need to know publishing if your goal isn't to become a published writer. But if your goal was to become a published writer, in the way to become a coach requires another, then you need to learn the business side of coaching. And Nicholas Sparks recognizes this. Any author, any artist who actually allows their artistry to be witnessed by another, to be enjoyed by another, this aspect of it is inherent. It is inherent to it. The visibility, the success, the exposure, the risk, as Tolkien said, of being subject to criticism, to opinions, to feedback, it's inherent. And you know what? No one can touch you with their criticism when you have already overcome it yourself. Now, I'm not going to go into that into too much detail right now. That will definitely be another podcast for another day. But to Nicholas Sparks's point about learning the business side of things in order to become a writer, he's right. And the same is true of coaching. And the same with, and finally, right, you can't be a writer without writing. It's exactly true of coaching. You cannot be a coach if you're not out there coaching. So there are some so much wisdom to be taken from, just these two beautiful books. And I encourage you to look at the people who you enjoy, whose creations you have enjoyed, and find their interviews, find their Q&As, find their forewords, and see what they have to say about their level of exposure, their level of success, them getting their work out there. I'm also really, really interested in like fantasy fiction. Like, I'm sure you've all heard of like A Court of Thorn and Roses, and the Onyx Storm that's just been released. This will show the date of this podcast episode, March 2025. And and these authors are, because of social media, have a greater level of exposure than they've ever had before. And it has been fascinating. Like, every time I see it pop up on my social media, I see all of this opinion, all of these discussion threads that go down about these books. And I just think to myself, gosh, guys, do you realize that somebody sat down and wrote this? Like, somebody, like, these authors could read this and take these opinions to heart. And it always just blows my mind how people can be so careless on the internet. But it makes me grateful that I don't have that level of exposure, that I don't have anywhere near that level of success, that I don't have anywhere near that level of fame yet. And I think it's an absolute blessing. And when I remember that, I think I can get myself out there. Like, for me and my little audience, I can say what I need to say. Like, I'm nowhere near as exposed as those guys. And I know that what I have to say is as important as what they have to say. I know that my artistry is as important as theirs. It is a gift that I don't have this level of exposure. And I know that if I was to ever get to that stage, I would have built the foundation to be able to hold that. Otherwise, it wouldn't come to me. And that I find very grounding and very humbling. And it gives me the courage to be able to show up and speak and share, this podcast episode with you, and share my perspective, my viewpoint. And I share this particular format, being a little bit different to what I usually do, as a small act of courage to encourage you to show up to your audience and share what comes alive for you, share what you're interested in, share what has made you think twice, just as these great authors have made me think twice and made me think, wow, like, they have inspired me and it inspires me to inspire you. I invite you to do the same with the things that you are passionate about, with the things that you love, and holding that perspective that it is such a gift that we don't have anywhere near the level of exposure that they have too. So, was that my most articulate podcast episode ever? Probably not. But did I love every second of that? I did. It brings so much joy to my heart to share the things I'm passionate about with you. I love geeking out on books, and I love reading. And it just, when you finish a good book and you close the book, especially when it's not on Kindle, when it's a physical book like the Notebook was, when it's a physical book and you can close the book and just hold it to your chest and go, wow, what do I do with my life now? You just need a moment of silence to just soak in how beautiful the book is. Reading those sections in the book, that's what they did for me. And yeah, I want you to bring that level of inspiration to your people too, because they need it, and they need it from you, specifically from you. Okay, thank you for joining me. I'll see you in the next podcast episode.